Yeah, I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then we'll go on the slideshow, if that's okay. So just real quick, I did do a slideshow because I just want to set the stage for everybody. A lot of this is done with other tools besides a lathe, obviously. So it's either going to be with a table saw or with a chop saw or something like that. And we couldn't demonstrate that here. Plus, it would take too long and you guys would fall asleep. So the way this is going to work is we're going to go into a little bit of a presentation. That presentation is going to be the foundation of segmenting, why, how, those types of things. And then when we have a video that I put together, that's me cutting some stuff up. I tried to speed it up so it's not boring, but at least you'll see how the segments are cut, how they're glued, how they're assembled, those types of things. So that's about a 15-minute video after the presentation. And then I have in the video that I was working on, I have those pieces and we'll turn some here. We won't have a finished product when we're done because it requires some more gluing, but everybody will have a basic fundamental understanding of what we're doing and why we do it that way. Fair enough? Cool. All right. So, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. And then I guess we'll start off with I'm going to do this because Steve's going to control, once you guys know what I'm doing, Steve's going to control the presentation from that side. And instead of me turning around every 3 minutes and looking at what's on the screen, I'm just going to have it my phone in front of me. So you see me looking down, that's why. Michael, Bob Edmiston was originally yeah. Yeah. I'm not even sure if he has joined on Zoom, but I know he's not feeling well at all. So
yeah, Bob is not.
I'm sure he will. And Bob, as we start, Bob did a tremendous amount of work. And I'm not joking. I'm not trying to be nice. He really did a ton of work. So because of the time we have, and because it's just me, I ended up cutting a lot of the stuff out. But if any of you guys are crazy enough to really get into segmenting, get with Bob and myself, because there is a bunch of information and resources that's available that he did spend a lot of time putting together. And I'm sure he'd love to share it. And I would too. You know, if somebody's interested, we'll do a breakout or whatever. But I got to give Bob major props. He did a lot of work. And I hate that he couldn't make it. Okay. All right. So segmenting 101, the whole point of this is going to be the foundational, it's the fundamental basics of it. We're not going to get into some crazy stuff. I am going to show you some crazy stuff that people have done with segmenting to try and inspire you, but we're not going to get into that. This is going to be the basic fundamentals. So we're going to talk about what it is, why segmenting, some examples. We got quite a few examples there. Design opportunities with segmenting, and then Jigs tools, the process, and then we'll do this short demonstration. So really, like I talked about though, my goal, I just want you guys to be able to leave here and go, oh, I get it. I know why. You may never do it. You may want to incorporate it into your work. You may see a new jig or tool or idea that you didn't think of before, or you may have a cool idea that you want to share too. So that's the cool part about segmenting, even though Norm doesn't agree. There's plenty of design opportunities. Okay, next slide. So what is segmenting? It is crazy people cutting up pieces of wood into smaller pieces and then gluing them together and making something out of that is what it is. So really there's some geometry involved for you guys that really love to do math. This is right up your alley. I am not that guy. That's not me. They invented calculators for me or computer applications for me. But if that's your thing, this is it. So it's really about gluing end grain pieces together, using kiln dried wood, creating an object from a board is what it boils down to. Next slide. Why would you do this besides being crazy? I won't go in order of what's on the slide. I like the challenge, and you guys know that I do basket illusion. So for me, it's a foundation for what I'm going to do next. It's the basis of what I'm doing. That does not mean you can't take it and go in a total different direction and have just a beautiful piece of art from just doing segmenting. And we'll show some of those too. But so you can do texturing, you can do pyrography with it. If you like creating new designs, if you're a jig person, I know some of you guys love creating jigs and little tools and tricks. This is the path you want to go down. All right, next slide.
Michael, I have a question. So isn't it an advantage with the basket illusions that you're not dealing with end grain?
Correct.
In the process, right?
Yep.
So it's all side grain. It gives you an advantage, that consistency in your
Yeah, so then there's a couple different aspects there for what I do on the basket illusion side. One is there's no end grain in terms of, because you can't sand after you've done the beading on it to do the basket illusion, you can't sand it because you don't want flat beads. So if I have end grain, no matter how good of a cut I've got, if I'm using that beading tool, I'm still going to get some tear out on that end grain. So for me, it gives me a real clean surface because I can't sand it afterwards. And then one, and then two, you guys know that end grain absorbs dye at a different rate than side grain does. And since I'm doing so much India ink all over the piece to give it colors and patterns, it would absorb differently in the end grain parts than it would on the side grain parts. So it gives me a foundation that I don't have to worry about any defects in the wood because I get to pick what I want to be part of that piece. It gives me all side grain for the reasons I just mentioned. So yeah.
And for those on Zoom, if you do have questions, just shout them out. I am monitoring what's the Zoom feed. So, and I will stop and ask Michael the questions.
I mean, I won't promise I have a good answer, but I'll make something up on the spot. Fair. Okay. All right. So these are really the only three types of segmenting. You've got closed on the left, you've got the open segmenting, and then the stave construction. So closed, that is closed. Somebody has laminated different pieces of wood, two different contrasting woods together and given it a brick pattern, but it's all closed. So that's a closed segment. Open segment is they space it apart. They've created something artistic and they've used the voids or the absence of wood to give it a new design. We won't be talking about that. That is, I'm crazy. That's even more crazy. So, but that is something I would encourage you to get into if you're into that. And then stave construction, you guys know, has been around forever and a day. If you think of whiskey barrels, that's what stave construction is. So it's cutting it at different miter angles, even at different angles on the diagonal, and then gluing and clamping it all together and then turning something out of it. But we're going to focus on the closed segments. And then next one. So again, the focus is, so miter cut, wood grain, the orientation, you're going to be end grain glue ups. You can use different woods. I've used nothing but hard maple here because I'm going to use this for a basket illusion piece. So I hate to be boring, but that's what it's going to be for me. I have used things like, am I saying it right? Sapelli? Yeah, sapelli. I've used sapelli, and then I've taken veneer that's dyed, like black dyed veneer, and then put them between the segments and then put them between the layers to give it that extra oomph. So you can have a really cool piece out of different types of woods and not have to just use it for a foundation. But if you do want different woods, I've done some coffee mugs or some tumblers, and I've used a bunch of different, everything from oak to walnut to, what do you call it, Paduke, all these different ones, and created cool patterns just by being random with the color pieces. So all those woods, the ones that, and I'll probably get into this a bit later, I would avoid oily woods just for the gluing process, but all the normal hard kiln dried woods, you're good to go. Everything at cling spores or most of everything you're going to find at like Capital City Lumber. And then we'll get into a little bit more. I'll show you the process, but that's a general, we're going to focus on that closed segmenting part. And then next slide. All right, so let's get into some examples on this. This is just a basic segmented bowl. I wouldn't call it not special. They've used different types of wood, maple, walnut. It looks like there's some figured maple in there too, but just a bunch of different woods to just create a bowl. Very simplistic. And then we'll go to the next one. And then something like that, which is an open segment. And I don't know all these people. I don't know who created them. These are internet searches. There's some cool pieces out there though. But an open vessel, you can see. And the purpose of this is to inspire you, give you ideas. What I'm going to do is kind of basic and fundamental. What we're going to show you here is going to be some additional pieces. Okay. And we're going to zip through some of these too. That's another example. Instead of putting a laminate or a veneer between the different layers, the stacks, they've just done it where they took a strip of wood, they've glued another contrasting piece of wood to it, and they've cut that as if it was one piece of wood and created segments from that. So an interesting piece, unique design opportunities. And then next. Don't ask me how they did that. I don't know. That requires a bunch of math, and I'm not your man for that. Oh, I thought you were gonna give us the equation. Like, this is how you do it. Okay. Yeah, but it's cool. Norm, you gonna tackle that? No, I didn't think that was in his vocabulary. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. This one I think is really fascinating because they've obviously used figured maple. I don't know what the contrasting wood is. I could guess, not quite sure. But the negative space, I think they've used really efficiently, and it makes you want to look at it, it makes you want to pick it up. It brings your eye to it. I just think it's a really cool piece. And obviously their form, the function of it, proportions, I just really think that's a cool piece. So that would give you, doing segmenting, bring you different opportunities there. Okay. Again, I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. So on something like this, there's obviously a bunch of different types of woods together, but they've used what they call an accent ring or a decorative ring. And all those individual pieces have been glued, laminated together, constructed, and then cut into a segment, and then made into a ring, and then stacked on another one. So you can go really crazy into this and have some really beautiful, unique pieces. Again, I'm not your guy, but I do admire it. Wait till you see this other one. Okay. That one, go ahead.
There's a Eli Avestera, I think is his name. Makes, I think he started selling like bricks you can get them.
That he's already pre-glued together and created stuff with?
And then you slice it, you know, if you know.
I don't know.
This is what it is.
I don't think so.
This guy does his own.
Yeah, I think this is his own. Do you guys know, I think it's Kyle Toth or Toth? Do you guys have? He does some phenomenal stuff with segmenting too. Yeah. But I don't know. There's a ton out there. I won't pretend to be an expert. I'm just here pretending like I stayed at a Holiday Inn or whatever it is last night. But yeah, beautiful pieces. That one with the rotation. So really, and I'll get into a little bit if you notice on the glue ups, those joint lines never match all the way up. They're always off center, but they've used this here to their advantage. Obviously it's intentional with the different color rings, the different color segments to give it that rotation. So just something interesting. The foundation's still the same if it was all one solid color piece of wood, but they've made it interesting by adding the contrasting woods and then step stoning it. All right. This one here is the one we just saw before. Yeah. So yeah, I know. Can you imagine? Exactly. The smallest wood turner on record. It's amazing. No, I just can't even imagine climbing inside of your piece and sanding it after you segment it like that. But wow, I thought you guys would appreciate that. Again, this one I think is phenomenal. I can't tell you how they constructed it or how they turned it. I don't know, but it's all segmented and it was turned, and it's a beautiful piece. I don't know, there's different interests amongst all of us, I'm sure. Some is very art, some is going to be very functional pieces, but I hope it inspires you and makes you think, oh, I can do something, even if you made it into something functional. If you took one of those pieces and turned it into a bowl and you use the premise of it, you still have a functional piece that's attractive. I love these ones too. Same kind of wood, different variations. The glue up is very basic, but they've stopped in some areas. They've cut away some areas. I just think they're really cool pieces, all segmented. And if you guys are going to get in segmenting, let me know, because I'll invest in some stock and glue, because you're going to use a lot of that. Same thing as before, using that negative space, the empty blocks, the contrasting woods, and then in my opinion, proportion and form. Again, that's another beautiful piece. It looks digital, the way the two are combining, and the thought process that needs to go into this before you even come to the lathe is intense, but if you like a challenge, this is something to think about. Same with this one. Again, the use of negative space, not putting a segment in there and creating something unique like that. And I think that's the end of the, yep, okay. So is everybody inspired? You guys excited? You guys ready to tackle all that stuff? Okay, we're not gonna do anything like that. So we're gonna talk about the tools and materials and jigs. It's really not a lot. You don't have to invest in a lot of stuff, but there are different tools you're gonna use in terms of jigs or tools, and I'll even include software in that too, because like I said, we're not gonna get into the math. Don't ask me a math question. You're gonna get a horrible answer. but the software takes care of all that for you. Okay. Choosing the wood. Obviously, you don't want to go out to what you have in your wood pile that you harvested over the summer or whatever and start ripping pieces of wood and using that. It's going to warp, it's going to crack, it's going to, it's going to bend, those kind of things. So kiln dried woods, obviously without defects. When I go and buy my lumber, there's going to be a defect in there somewhere, but when I do my planning, I make sure I cut that defect out and it doesn't end up in my piece. The relative properties should be similar. So hardwood, I wouldn't recommend a softwood for this. I wouldn't put like cocoa bolo with a maple or something that's going to move more than another piece of wood. I would try to keep them relatively similar together if you're going to add different contrasting woods to give it a unique look. But mostly I would stay away from the oily woods. And then obviously, do you want something functional or do you want something artistic? And that's going to be your design choice there. It's going to really determine what kind of wood you buy, what kind of wood you use. Have you ever been to the wood store and, oh my God, there's a piece of this Paduke that's this and that, and they've got it on sale and you bought it and it's been sitting in your shop for like 15 years and you can't quite figure out what to do with it. Yeah, and you're a wood turner and you have a big piece of wood that you can't turn anyways. Think about segmenting for that stuff. I have a bunch of those. Yes, sir. Do we have a tornado warning? Oh, it's a thunderstorm. That's not a bad omen, is it? Yeah. Thanks for that question, Jeff. Next. No, I'm just
and ash is real grainy. Things look great until I started sanding. And then all that orange sand, sawdust, and the dude got down into the ash. And that is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Now you need wood compressor, so close range woods.
Yeah. So what Jeff had just said was about using, and I'm sure other people have probably done this too, if you've done any kind of laminating before, whether it's segmenting or not, combining something like ash and Paduke together, and all of a sudden you go to sand it and you've got Paduke dust in every single pore on that ash and it's impossible to clean up. So close grain woods, match them together, you'll be better off that way. All right, next. Glue. There's 1,000 opinions about glue from everybody. I think most of us here in our world, we probably all use Type Bond for the most part. I use Type Bond 3, and it's not because I have some kind of logic behind it, like these pieces are going to get wet, so I want a wood glue that is going to be water. No, I just happen to always buy Type Bond because when I was doing pieces like the tumblers, I wanted them to be able to get wet when they're pouring coffee in them and stuff, and I just never quit buying it. So I use Type Bond 3. You can use Type Bond 2, you can use original, whatever you want to use. I wouldn't use a CA glue because it's going to discolor the wood. I wouldn't use the glue that, what's it called? Like the Gorilla Glue that starts to expand with moisture. I wouldn't do any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't touch those. I probably would not do an epoxy. I would just stick with a wood glue. And even if it's just normal Elmer's wood glue, it's still going to hold together. It's really strong. I have yet to have, and I've done segmenting pieces since I started wood turning, which I won't pretend has been forever and a day, but it's been over 5 years. And one of the first things I did was a segmented piece just because I like the challenge of it. I've never had one blow apart on me. Never had one come apart because of failed wood, a glue joint. So my experience is the wood breaks before the glue joint breaks. But anyways, Type Bond is the way I would go. If you're really going to get into it, get one of those little glue bot things because it'll save you a ton of time. Okay. Clamping, pretty simple when you think about it. I use for most of my pieces the hose clamps down at the bottom. And I actually did bring some. I'm pretty sure everybody has seen one of these before. If you haven't, you're welcome to play with it, look at it. But I use these and I buy them in different lengths and then I can bind them together and create whatever size I need up to 14, 16 inches down to little bitty ones too. These are my go-tos for clamping. The case where we talk about using your fingers, if you're going to do an open segment and you're placing those pieces while it's on your lathe and you want to get them perfectly, and you have a little jig set up that gets them perfectly where you want them, you're really going to use your finger and you're going to hold there to the glue sets for a minute. And then the next one and the next one. Like I said, I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid. So that's not going to be my thing. Those little spring clamps, those work really well too for putting the two rings together. And then if you're doing stave type segmenting, those, what do you call it? The hose clamps or the ratchet clamps, those work really well too. But I would say if you're going to get into it, just buy a bunch of hose clamps. Just go to Home Depot or Lowe's, buy a bunch of those, different sizes, and then combinations to get the size you need. Okay. So the anatomy of a segment, the ones that I focus on the most or that I'm concerned with the most is obviously right here, that yellow is going to be the height or the thickness of the wood. And I guess it would help if I had one of these. So when I'm designing a piece, I know that I'm going to do it, and don't ask me the math. Maybe Jeff.
I'm in the
there you go,
house.
thank you. Maybe Jeff can do math for us real quick, or if Jim's online, I'm sure Jim could do it like in his head like that.
Oh, I went
Thickness.
in
So
there to
I'm
get
buying
something. I
4/4,
totally forgot about it.
and I know it's going to be less than that when I'm done. When I design, I rough it out and I go,
Yeah,
okay,
leave
each
your
layer is
car
gonna be an
with
inch. If
either
I
out
want a piece
front
that's gonna
or
be 10
on
inches
my
tall,
side of the,
I want it to be exactly 10
Driver's
inches
mom's
tall.
out,
I'm
I
gonna do
think.
something with 11
So-
layers to it. Because
so
I
she
know I'm
can
gonna
pull
have
in
some
the
weight
drive.
there. But on the average, I'll just call it 10 inches and I'm using 4/4 and I'll lose a little bit on the sides. But so I'm concerned about thickness and then edge length. So this is going to be the outside of the ring. Like here. So that's my edge length right here. The wider that is, the larger diameter ring I'm going to get. So that's an important equation right there is the edge length. That interior dimension here, the face of that segment, depending on the depth of how much I need to cover. If I'm going outwards and I have a smaller ring and I need to go to a larger ring, well, the larger ring in the top is going to have more depth, obviously, to compensate for that curve when I turn it. So I'm worried about my depth here, my height in terms of rings. I'm worried about the width, so it gives me the diameter. And then if you're really into this kind of stuff, you could do all that math either in Excel or on a graph paper or something like that and figure it out. That's not me. I'll show you a better way. Okay, that's the anatomy of a segment, essentially. Okay, and then obviously the miter angle. I'm going to show my jig here in a second, which is a wedgie sled. Who hasn't seen a wedgie sled before? Pretty sure everybody has. Okay, the one guy in the room. So the wedgie sled is it's a jig. I'll show it to you guys in a second, but you can buy different wedges that are different angles to give you that mitered angle that we showed there a second ago. And then really you boil it down to how many segments do you want? Do you want 12? Do you want 16? Do you want 24? If you're getting into some really intricate designs and you're using contrasting woods, you may want to go up in size in terms of how many segments you have per ring type scenario. But for me, I do everything in 16. I think 12 is a little too boxy when I go to turn it. 16 is right for me, so I'm not cutting too many and trying to make too many pieces. Okay, and that's that mitered angle. That would determine that miter angle. All right, next one. Obviously, you guys have seen this already. This is what it looks like inside of a part of a ring. That one's got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that one's got 12. I do mine on 16 segments per ring. Okay. So these are the variables, and this is where it gets fun and challenging. If you like, yeah.
All of you, same number, they get wider.
Yes. So Preston asked, go ahead. Okay. Yeah. So Preston asked if all of the rings have the same number of segments, but they're just wider. And yes. So I'm set up for 16 segments per ring. And that edge length here is what determines how the diameter is of that piece. And you'll see a little bit of that in the video. I'm cutting I think I'm cutting the base for the very smallest ring for the base of this piece is what you'll see in the video. Okay. So those variables, these are all the things to take into consideration. And I don't want this to become or feel overwhelming or like, good Lord, why would I get into this? It's really not a big deal. These are going to be same way when you approach a piece, you're going to turn, well, how big do I want it to be? What I want the dimensions, what kind of wood do I want to use? Same type of things. It's just some things that take into consideration. So we just talked about how many segments for a ring. Do I want 12? Do I want 16? Do I want 24? If I know I want 24 because I'm going to do a contrasting wood and come up with a cool pattern, well, then I need to figure out what angles I need to cut that miter at to get 24 to create a full 360 degrees. And software is going to do that for you. How many rings do we need to make what we're making? I talked about that already. If I'm using 4/4, then I know if I want something 10 inches, I'll probably need 10 rings, maybe 11 to compensate for any kind of loss in the ring height when I'm cleaning them up. Edge length, we just talked about that. That determines the diameter. The board width for each one, and what we're talking about there is this piece here, so that we can get a deeper ring, a wider ring to compensate when we're making those curves. Sorry, we're flipping back and forth. And then we go back to the,
Right there, you get a better visual on. Okay. So down in the bottom, you got a really wide piece of wood.
yep,
And look at the edge and come forward, pick it up. You make a long ring, you cut longer segments, and that gave you a larger diameter.
yep.
And the smaller the ring, the shorter
The
segment.
edge length is shorter. Yep. And you're going to see that when we cut up some pieces on the table saw in the video too. So that it'll probably make more sense there. Okay. Board width, that's what it determines. The board width, what I'm cutting up to make segments, determines how much of that area it's going to cover. Is it going to be a full disc, or is it going to be a thin, narrow ring? Because I don't need all that to waste all that wood. Does that make sense? Okay. Height, thickness, we talked about that. Mitering, we talked about that. And then obviously, what are we going to make? We're going to do a bowl, we're going to do a platter, we're going to do a vessel. You know, all those things taken into consideration. This is nothing new for wood turners. We think about this all the time when we grab a log and try and figure out what we're going to do out of this. Is this going to be a plate? Is it going to be a bowl? Whatever. And then the project concept. I don't want to get wrapped around the axle on a project concept and make it sound like it's a big to do. It's not. And we can get into the next slide too. We'll talk about software. So for us, obviously a project bowl, what do we want to make? In this case, I want to make a vessel because I'm going to use it for basket illusions. So that determined what shape I'm going to do. It determined what wood I'm going to use. So that was my goal here. And then gather reference materials. In this case, I've already designed a bunch of these. I know which one I want to use. I have it saved on my computer, or I go out online and I get inspiration from other ones and I go, that one's really cool. And then I start to try and mimic that inside the application so I can design it. So those are my references, project drawings, and then the layout, rings, segments. All that is going to be within the software application. And then taking all the measurements, good pair of calipers. And when I mean digital calipers, don't buy the cheap ones, buy decent ones. I use that all day, every day for determining the board thickness that I need to rip on the table saw, to my edge or to my wall thickness, all those kind of things. So if you don't have a pair, get a pair of those. And then obviously you got to figure out all your data points. Computer software will do that for you. And then the final cut list, that software will generate that cut list for you. And I have an example of that too, you'll see. So you know what to cut, how to cut. You don't have to be a rocket scientist and figure out all the math for yourself.
What are the names of what software do you use?
So I use one called Segment Turner, I believe it's called. And then there's Wood Turner Pro is another one. And then in this presentation, I'm sure Bob will put it up on our website. There's hyperlinks to both of those. And one of the other slides that shows the software we use, one Bob uses, the one I use, there's hyperlinks directly to their website. And you can look and download the software if you wanted to. It's going to range, and I think I have it listed on the presentation too. I think mine was less than $50. It was like $48 for the download. I'm cheap. I bought it probably 4 or 5 years ago. I get free updates on it and it does what I need it to do. Bob's application is around 170, I think, and I'm not going to get into it tonight because I don't know it the way Bob does. I would encourage, if you're interested in this, talk to Bob about it. But his application, I'll go off on a tangent for a second. His application will let you take an image from something you found online. Oh, I really like this vessel, a picture, like the one we saw a minute ago that we were like, it's a seed base. We thought it was cool. You can import it into his software. You move the picture over so you're getting a 50%, half of it, so it shows you the profile into it, and then it exports it, and then it creates it in a 3D environment within the application, and then it tells you what you need to do in order to create a cut list and all the different pieces. So it's pretty cool. I think it's about 180 bucks. Mine is more, I drag little data points over to the side and I kind of figure out what shape I want and it generates something for me, but I can't import a picture of something I saw online. Okay. Yep. So this is, if you're into this kind of stuff, if you're like Jeff and you like to do things the hard way, this may be for you. You can invest in some graph paper, get out the old slide ruler, or I don't know, what's that thing called where you move the beads, whatever that thing is, abacus, whatever. And you can figure all this out. Bob, I think, has done this. Bob is like this. He's smart like that. I am not. So this is the manual way. If it's for you, then next month come up here and teach the class on how to do it the manual way, but it's not for me. Okay, so that's manual, and the next one's going to be computer assisted. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of you can design it. It's going to pull up all these different aspects of it. You can design different accent rings, you can tell it what kind of wood you're going to use. It'll even tell you what the project is going to cost you if you plug in the board foot of like, oh, I want to use Paduke, and it's going to tell you how many feet of Paduke you need. And if you tell it the price you got to pay for Paduke, it'll tell you the total cost of everything. So that Woodturner Pro is Bob. The segment project planner is me. Those are hyperlinks. You can click on them and go and look and see what they do and why they do it and how much it costs. Fair enough? Okay.
This PowerPoint will be on the website.
Yeah. I'm sure Bob will get it up there quickly. Okay, next slide. So this is Bob's software, and it's relatively the same as mine, so I didn't take it out and replace it with mine. But this is that side view, and this is an example of Bob took a picture of something he found online that he liked. He cut it in half, essentially, in the computer, the picture, got the profile, imported it. It created a 3D rendering, and then it tells him, based on the material he's going to use, if he's using 4/4, and he wants to be able to make those corners and make those angles, all the pieces he needs to cut. It's going to generate a cut list, tell him what to cut, how much to cut, all that stuff, and then he can assemble it and turn it that way. So the software does it all for you. You don't have to figure out the math. All right, next slide. This is mine. So this is a project plan. This is actually this piece here. So I'm going to focus here for 2 seconds. I don't think we have to flip back to me for the camera or anything. But so on Zoom, if you see the ones that I've highlighted that say board length and board width, when I'm taking all this to my shop and I'm getting out to the table saw, and I've got my lumber that I got from Klingspors or Capital City Lumber, and I'm going to start cutting these pieces up and ripping them down. The two things that I really only care about right now is that board length and the board width. So on, let's call it row 9, if we look at the board width, it's 3 and 19/32. That's because I need to cover all that area in the bottom so I can make that transition cut from 9 to 10 is what I'm doing. So I need a really wide disc at the bottom, where on something like rows 5 and 6, I don't need that. I don't need to waste a bunch of wood. There's no point in that. So that board width only needs to be for 5 and 6, 27/32. That's all it needs to be. So that's when I'm ripping these pieces. And I think in the video, you see me rip 5 and 6 in the video. So that's what I care about there. That length is going to be based on how long those edges are for the diameter of that ring. So I can't just say that every single board I'm going to cut and rip is going to be 36 inches. It could be that I need something that's 27 inches, 29 inches, because it's compensating for that edge length on the segments. I will say that no matter what software application you use, add 3 to 4 inches to it, because you're going to cut one wrong by accident. You're going to run it through the saw, and then it's going to slide, and you're going to hit the blade, and it's going to make the side not straight, or something's going to happen. So give yourself a little extra room. But the software tells you X, add 3 inches to it. And that gives you a little room to play with. Yes, sir.
Software allows you to put the blade.
It does. Yeah, you tell I've got a 1/8 inch, and I use the compound blade for mine because that's all I half I do rips and half I do, what do you call it? Cuts. Okay. And then obviously if I had plugged in my material cost, it would have showed up. I don't care about all that. The wall thickness, I really don't mess with that. If you look at that first column, the layers, obviously that's going to tell you what layer you're on, but that sides, I'm always going to use 16. If I was going to do an accent piece right in the middle of this, and I wanted to do something with contrasting woods, and I might plug in, oh, this one's going to be 24 segments, and it'll calculate all that for me. I'm doing 16 down the board. Layer height, I'm using 4/4. I don't get all squirrely about, well, really, it's going to be 7/8. It's not quite 4. I don't care. I'm just plugging in 4/4, calling it an inch and be good. Wall thickness, again, we talked about. The miter angle is actually telling me what that miter angle is. I use the wedgie sled, so I don't care. I'm just cutting and it's going to be consistent every time. And then at the right gives me my glue up diameter. I have made mistakes before. That's why I have these rings that I brought, because these are mistakes. I wasn't paying attention. I had looked at the numbers wrong. I transposed them, something. I cut it up, glued the ring, and then I went to go mate the pieces together. And I was like, why does this piece fit inside the other ring? This doesn't make any sense. So yeah. It's going to happen. But the only reason why I really care about that outside diameter is because when I realize I screwed up, I get out the tape measure and I go, oh shit, that's what I did. I measured the wrong thing and the ring's too small. Other than that, it's pretty simple software. It tells you what to cut. It's a no-brainer. Okay. Oh, is it? Actually, if you guys want to play. And it shows you the different diameters. So jigs, the wedgie sled is what I do. Bob uses the segment cutter on his chop saw. I will not try to speak for Bob. I've never done it that way. I can give you an idea real quick of what they do, but if Bob were here, I'd say, Bob, tell him what you do. And he would probably give you a lot more better detail. But we'll go to the next slide, if you will, and then we can talk about it for 2 seconds. So on that chop saw, he obviously built this. He's got hold down clamps. You can see that segment board that he's using, or that piece of wood he's using at the back near that register board at the back. That's what he's using to cut his segments with. What you're doing in that case is you have a strip of wood. You're using the chop saw. You've set your miter angle. You're cutting it, and then you're flipping that piece of wood over, and you're moving it to the stop block so that your length is the same, and you're cutting the opposite one. Flip, cut, flip, cut, flip, cut. That's his process. Typically, when you do it that way, instead of gluing up the ring as a whole, you glue up 2 half rings. So you do, 180 degrees of it, and then you do another 180 degrees of it, and then you take it to a sander, like a disc sander, and you sand it to get the 2 ends straight, and then you glue them together. Normal, believe this, but that's too much work for me. So, yes, sir.
That's the only thing that I would add to that particular process.
Which is,
Because I can chop off. When you shove that piece of wood in against that stock.
Yep.
You bring that blade down. If you don't have the patience to wait, you let saw that blade is dead stop, and you start raising it up, your little segment's going flying and you're going to change. What I do is a movable block on that stop. Shove your piece in, slide your stop out of the way, make your cut. I don't send pieces flying, I don't really need.
all right.
It's quick and easy.
I'm going to repeat that in the short version for people on Zoom. So what we're talking about, what Jeff's talking about here is on the left of where that cut is going to be for that mitered angle. There's a stop block. And what that's doing is telling you the edge length. If you lock it down, I need consistent segments so it controls the edge length. What Jeff was saying is that if you're not patient and you bring that chop saw down and then you don't wait for the blade to stop before you lift it up, it's going to take that segment and toss it across your shop. So what he does is he removes that stop block while the blade's still going, and that way it allows that segment a place to go without flinging it across the shop. Fair? Okay. All right. Sure. Great question, Preston. Hang on to it. I'll show you. Preston asked, what happens to all the glue? Do I wipe it off or how do we get rid of it? And I was joking. The answer is I do wipe it down. When I glue them together, I wipe off the excess, but you're still not going to have level pieces. It's never going to be perfect. So we'll talk about flattening discs or flattening rings and different ways to flatten them so you can mate them together and create your form. Okay, next one, please. So this is my wedgie sled. I just like saying wedgie, it's fun. On the left is this stop block. I made all this. I'm not super smart. I'm not, an engineer. I just follow what I saw online. If you just Google wedgie sled online through YouTube, you'll get 1,000 different videos to show them how to do it. The whole purpose of this is that it secures inside the rail on my table saw. I have the magic feather board here that has the magnets inside of it you can turn on and off. I put that behind it so that when I'm running it past it, it doesn't take it with it, because that's my stop block to turn my edge length. So I can control this. You'll see me do it in the video. I set my depth, which is really how much do I want in terms of how thick do I want that to be. And I lock it down. And then that way it's repeatable, it's consistent, same thing over and over again. And then my sled, which is this piece here. Again, if I were to remake this, I'd make it bigger because I started making larger vessels and I need wider boards. So a lot of times I'll have the board hanging off and it doesn't fit within this area here. But the cool part about doing a wedgie sled is that you can buy these wedgies if you have a 3D printer, they make them now, you can get them 100 different ways. Back when I first started doing this, you had to buy them from the wedgie store type thing, and you had to buy different sizes. And anyway, so you put that in there, I loosen my screws, I put the wedge in there that tells me I want 16, and actually what it's doing is saying 11.5 degrees is what it's there at. I can loosen these, I can put it together. The cool part is I can move this one all the way over to this side, put the wedgie sled in there and pull this one with it so it registers. And I'm still going to get the right miter angle every single time, but it's going to give it a kind of a different design if I were to put pieces of veneer in the middle of it or something like that. So I don't really have to worry about accuracy 100% when you use something like this, where accuracy with the miter, you have to be a lot more accurate on that side. Any questions about a wedgie sled or the purpose? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but still cool. Okay. So that's my setup, obviously. And then I think we're getting close to the end here. Me babbling. Yep. So we've talked about all that stuff. All sounds cool and interesting. But now what? We still got to figure out the layout. We got to rip the lumber. We got to cut the segments. We got to sand the segments. We got to glue them together. We got to construct the rings. We got to flatten the rings. Then we got to glue those rings on top of each other to create a form. So that's what we're going to do next. All right. We can play the demo or the video now, and I'm going to talk over it to some degree, but probably not a whole lot to say unless we have questions or unless there's something interesting I think we need to talk about. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, you guys get here saw noises and probably the dog come out in the shop and bark or something. So you guys saw this already. Like I talked about, that's where I'm going to focus is on that board length and the board width. That's all I care about right now when I'm ripping stuff. I know that these pieces need to be X long. I've added 3 inches to whatever X is, and I'm just cutting them up so I have something manageable to work with versus a full slat or a full board. Ooh, is that better? You guys like to hear the noises? There's a knot hole, obviously. I'm gonna ignore that. I'm gonna cut past it. And you guys are lucky. My shop actually got cleaned just to shoot this. If it wasn't for this video, there would be 500 things on that table right there and about 2 feet of sawdust everywhere. All I'm doing here is I'm just gonna get a clean edge to register against that fence. I'm not doing any rocket scientist here. I'm just getting that clean edge. Safety first. It does sound weird without volume, doesn't it? Yeah. It's like saw stop, but it's like, shh. All right. Caliper time. I know I need that to be 27, 30 seconds. It's for that strip that I talked about, the row 5 and 6. You guys know how to do this, obviously. If anybody doesn't know how to do this, we should have a separate conversation. Maybe an intro to woodworking at NC State, if you would like to. So I know I needed 2 of those. I went ahead and set it. I'm going to cut 2 of those strips real quick. What you're going to see next, though, so this isn't completely boring, you're going to see me take a Sharpie. I'm going to label or indicate which row that I cut that for. And then I'm going to put some squiggly lines on it. And the reason why I'm going to put squiggly lines on it is I need a witness to what was the top of that versus the bottom of that strip. And then when we see me glue them together, it'll become obvious why. Because that blade, even though I have the digital, hey, it tells me I'm exactly at 90 degrees to the bed, all that kind of stuff, there's going to be a slight variance. So the reason why I'm making those register marks is that when I cut up those segments, I'm going to flip every other one because it's going to compensate for any kind of deviation that was in that blade in terms of manufacturer deviation, or it's not quite, it's like 89.6 and not 90 degrees. So now that I have those strips, I've got them cut, I know what the top is. Now I'm going to focus on those actual segments. And the part that I care about there is that edge length. That's the only part that I really care about. So I'm going to measure, I'm going to go to my cut list. I'm going to figure out what that edge length is for that particular strip of wood for that row. And then I'm going to set that to my stop block on the left. What you'll see here is there's a couple of different ways I do this. I didn't want to videotape me doing it this way because I didn't want to hear about it. I don't always put a little sled on the left-hand side of that blade. Sometimes I just let it go and I have a pencil with an eraser on it and I cut and I take the pencil eraser and I move that segment out of the way so it doesn't sling back at me while the blade's going. In this case, I actually glued a piece of wood on it that was on an angle. So as I cut them, they roll away from the blade and fall off to the side. So I'm setting my edge length here to the outside of that blade, or to the, I'm sorry, to the, the outside of that blade to my stop block. I know whatever that measurement is. I can't see it. I don't know. I put my little magic magnet down there to keep it from moving around. I promise we change angles here in a minute, so you don't have to look at my elbow. I'm going to cut off that first section just to get the right angle to start with. That's just a waste piece. And then all I'm doing is alternating back and forth, going to that stop block, coming back, flipping it to the other wall, pushing to the stop block, and then cutting again and again and again. So it's just going to give me a repeated segment. No. Nope, it's just based on, I've already set that and locked it down, and it's always going to be that 11.5 degrees on each side.
That's what the wedges.
Yeah, that's what the wedges are. They set that for you. I always, so I cut all that up, and then I always count, and then I double count, because I have had cases where I thought I cut 16, but I got distracted, and then I go to glue it up and I realize I have 15. So I always count them twice. And then see all those little furries on there? I never touch the segment, the part that's going to be glued to the next segment. I never touch that to the sandpaper. I don't want to change that angle at all. All I'm doing is getting rid of the fuzzies on the bottom of the segment or on the face of the segment. That's all I'm doing. Because when I glue them together, I don't want those fuzzies to get in between each other and then make it so I don't have a perfect glue joint. I do. Actually, when you get super glue on your fingers, you go to that thing right there and it just comes right off. It's awesome. I'm not joking. I've done it like 100 times. I'm like, oh, damn. And I just take it to the sandpaper. So you'll see I'm flipping every other one. Like I talked about, that's just to compensate for any variance in that degree angle on that blade, whether it's 90 degrees or it was 90.1. I usually use a rubber band just to hold it together. And then I do them all at once. I don't cut and then glue and then go and cut some more. I cut all my segments at one point. I put them in a baggie. The baggie's labeled what level, what layer that is. And then I glue all at once. For this purpose of this, I cut one real quick and glued one real quick. I like to take 3 at a time like that, set them off to the side, do it any way you want to. Get a puddle of glue and take your finger and do one at a time, whatever works for you. This is just the way I do it. I think it's the most efficient way for me, or it's become a habit. I don't know. I think there can be such a thing as too much glue, because then the segments will just kind of move around on you, even when you really clamp it down. But I don't worry about that so much. I worry about too little glue, especially when you're talking about gluing on the end grain. It's going to absorb some of that in there. That is a cutting board off of Amazon. That's what is it called? HDP. And so it does get glue all over it. After a period of time, I just take a scraper or razor blade and I get it right off, and I have a clean surface again.
Take that little red cover and stick it right on the top there, gets it out of the way.
Oh, yeah.
It works really well.
That's a good point. I mean, that's what it's designed for. I just didn't realize it. See, I did the demo and learned something. This is great. I clamp them down pretty tight. Pressing, there you go. I'm wiping off some of the excess glue. And then it's really rinse and repeat. So I've got 10 layers. I've done that 10 different times. You can tell they're not level. They're not clean.
The suggestion.
And then what I did is I actually went and purchased.
Steve, can you
Yes.
hear us? Steve, are you there?
Sorry, yes. So on the glue bot, that piece that hangs off, that is the cap for the glue, you can take it and stick it to the top of the bottle itself and it gets it out of the way. Yeah, there's an indent in the top of that lets, yeah, you've got it right there. There we go. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm a big dummy and I just let it hang there. You can actually take it and attach it to the top here because there's something on the top, and it gets it out of the way, and you can actually be smart, which was not me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I actually went out and bought a drum sander just for doing this. That's the only thing I use a drum sander for, because I do so many of them because of the basket illusion. The basket illusion stuff takes me 40, 50, 60 hours by itself. So why prolong it by hand sanding rings and all that kind of stuff? You don't have to do this. I'll show you a different way. But this is like an I Love Lucy episode where she's trying to get all the candy off the conveyor belt. But that's what I do, is I run them through the drum sander and I get them clean. They're perfectly the same size all the way around in terms of thickness. And that way I got a really good surface to be able to mate the two rings together and build on top of each other.
If you're doing thin rings, you can actually hot glue them to a board.
Yes.
But a whole series of
So what was said was when you're doing really thin rings, you could hot glue them to a board like a piece of plywood and then run them through that way. So you don't have to worry about bottoming it out on that drum sander. So here's the alternate. This is what I did before I bought a drum sander. It's not impossible. If you're doing a couple segmented pieces a year or every 6 months, something like that, this makes sense. If you're doing it like I'm doing it, where I'm cranking out, trying to do 15, 20 pieces at a time, and each piece has 10 rings, and each ring is 16 segments, it doesn't make sense. It's worth the investment to me for a drum set. So here's the alternate option. Put them in your cold jaws, level them out. I do a couple push cuts on it just to get the high points off. And then I'll turn around and just do shear scraping cuts and level it out. And then you'll see after a second or two here, I actually take a long straight edge and I hold it together because I don't want that ring to be concave or convex. I need them to mate perfectly together and fit tightly. And I keep looking at these guys. I feel bad. I'm sorry.
So there was a little more turning in your segmenting work, but you took it out.
I did. Yeah. I mean, who wants to turn? I just want to glue stuff together all day. Didn't you guys ever play with Lincoln Logs when you were a kid? It is funny because I will sit there and I actually do my glue ups inside. I'll sit in my recliner with a TV tray and that cutting board, and I'll glue while I'm watching Netflix or whatever. And I think about it, I'm like, I'm almost 50, still playing with wood blocks when you really think about it. So that's it. That's the way to do it. And Bob, we could pause real quick. I'm sorry. Bob has another way too that he brought to my attention is he takes a piece of wood and he does the spray adhesive and he puts a piece of sandpaper on it. And then he puts them in the cold jaws and then holds that piece and it gives them clean surface. So that's another way to do it too. I've never done it that way. I'm probably too impatient, ironically. But that is another way to do it too. Yes, sir. Mr. Jeff.
One of the things I wound up doing when I got to the very small rings was took a big piece of wood, glue the wedge into it, put the small ring up against that and run it through the drum sander so it doesn't kick the whole thing back.
Yes. Yeah. So if it is a small piece, a small ring, and you're running it through the drum sander, let's call it the smallest ring on here, which is probably 3.5 in diameter. Running that through the drum sander, if I don't put something behind it to back it, sometimes it just gets there and hung up, or it will spit it out. So that was Jeff's point, is how to get it to go through the drum sander all the way without getting lost in there or kicked out. And then the last part of this video, what I did is I took, I just make some waste blocks. I mount them in the chuck, and then I flatten them out, make sure the surface is perfectly square. And the whole purpose of this point of the video is to show you how I mate those rings together and get them where they should be in terms of accurate. I guess I'm taking a nap right now. I don't know. Never adjust your tool rest with the lathe on. Yeah, so I'm just getting a flat surface. I don't want anything concave. I don't want any lumpy bumpies. So what I'm going to do after I do that is take a straight edge to it and make sure that we're flat. I don't care if it's got some tear out. It doesn't really matter to me. I just need a flat surface. So that's a piece of cherry that I had. That's my waste block. Exactly. And actually, I have done that too. Norm's comment was tear out makes the glue stick better. I have in some cases, if I felt like the surface of that waste block was too smooth, I've actually put divots in it or just to give it glue something to hold on to. So what I do is I have cold jaws in a dedicated chuck, and I just adjust those cold jaws. I use my tail sock and I line it up, and that's how I find center every single time. And I glue my rings that way. So we'll do 2 here, and then that'll be enough for you, I think. So there's my waste block. I'm just marking on that ring where that waste block is so I don't waste a bunch of glue, is all it boils down to. I'm just amazed at how smooth this, like mine's not that smooth. Huh. There's an out of focus glue. There's my fat fingers. The only thing when you do it this way, you need to pay attention to is that that is registered flat when you start using that tailstock as your clamp. So I'll put them together, I'll move it around a little bit so I know it's registered clean, and then I start locking it down and using my tailstock as a clamp. And when the rest of the video is just watching this glue dry. So I hope you guys enjoy this.
So you just have a cone in your tailstock?
Yep, just a cone in the tailstock.
How long are you waiting to do?
Honestly, I wait 15, 20 minutes. It's enough to set up. I don't worry about it. I don't turn it that quickly, but I'll wait 15 minutes, go back out, put another ring on, go back out, and then I usually turn the next day. Yeah. Sometimes when I start turning, the glue's slinging across the shop, but whatever, it's fine. Yeah. Actually, I've done things with super glue before, and all of a sudden, super glue splashed across your glasses. Yeah, because you thought that the medium was dry enough or the thick was dry enough, and it wasn't. Same thing here. Rinse and repeat. But and Bob does the same thing, by the way. Bob uses his tailstock with cold jaws in it. It's perfect. It keeps it perfectly lined up. It's centered, and it's a great clamp. Sometimes, see between the cold jaws, that gap, sometimes if I don't feel like it's perfectly mated or the pieces are more disc shaped and less ring shaped, and I really am worried about if that tailstock has enough clamping power, I go get the squeeze clamps and I'll run that bar between the opening on those cold jaws, and I'll physically clamp those pieces together on the lathe. So I know they're still centered, but I get extra additional clamping power. Yes. Why though? So if you notice, one thing to point out here is the joints on the segments. When you're going ring to ring, you want to alternate those joints. If you have all the same joints in the same way going up, even though that glue is super strong, if that thing were to fall on the ground, the chances of it breaking in half right along that glue joint, but you guys are shaking your head, it's common sense. But I have glued rings together and then like, oh crap, I didn't pay attention. So pay attention when you're gluing the rings together, you want off-center glue joints. All right. I'm not a professional turner. Don't judge me. It is what it is. But what the logic behind this is, I have made these to where I've assembled the full piece, made a vessel, did all the rings together at one time. I do have a hollowing system. I do hollowed vessels. But then I had this epiphany of why? Why would I go through all that to turn a vessel that's segmented, that's already open? So why? Especially when you've got 16 different angles inside here, and you've got the hollowing tool, and it's inside this little hole, and it's all glued together, which is still going to be good, but why run the risk? And plus, it just beats the hell out of you while you're trying to turn away that inside piece. So I'm sure this is not a new idea. It's not but it was an epiphany for me, which was, why don't I just make two halves, basically turn two bowls, and then mate them together, and then clean up and make it all so it's clean on the outside. Probably did 200. No, I probably did probably 5 or 6, and I was like, why am I doing this? This is stupid. Like the glue bot thing. I didn't know you put that stupid thing on the top. Whatever. Side note, I worked with a guy who owns a plumbing company, and I'm like a 5-year-old with 1,000 questions. Why you do that? Why you do that? And then I liken it to that. When I would go out and help him during 2020, I got laid off, and he was doing plumbing work, building Bojangles. So he's like, you want to go do some work? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Let me cut some stuff up and do some stuff. And then all of a sudden, seeing somebody else does it, you're like, well, I'm a big dumbass. Like these epiphanies of like, why didn't I think of that? So that's So I'm the big dummy sometimes, and when I see somebody else do it, I go, well, duh. So if I can help you guys avoid being a big dummy, just do 2 halves. If you got enough chucks, do 2 halves and glue them together. So what I do is I get my 2 halves, I take my chucks, I leave them in here, I put the cone center in, I just mate them together. I don't have to be lined up perfectly. I just need to make sure that it's one side's not cattywampus, which is a technical term. I use that as my clamp. And that's it. So then I've got essentially a piece, because what I want to do is I want to turn this as one piece from the outside to get my, hey, this is what it's going to look like. And then after I've registered or I've identified what my shape is going to look like, and there's going to be variations. In that picture you saw of what that cut list looked like, that would be ideal. There's always going to be a variation in there somewhere. I'll take a little bit more off at one point or another point. So then once I get that outside shape defined, then I'll separate the 2 halves again, and I'm going to turn the inside on one. I'm going to swap the chucks out, turn the inside on the other, and then I'll mate them together. We won't do all that tonight, obviously, but this will be a general idea. Okay. Yes, sir. It is. It's going to be a sphere shape. And then the top, I call this a JJ, which stands for John Jordan. And because his form, in my mind, I really like that look where it looks like a bulb, something organic. So I have to give him credit on that shape. I know he's not the only one that's ever made those shapes. A lot of people do. But every time I see something that's organic, bulb shape, whether it be onion or a gourd or something like that, the first thing that comes to mind is John Jordan. So I actually labeled this as JJ on the cut list. That's what, if you saw that in the sheet, that's what that stood for. Okay. My first goal is to just trim up all this. I don't know how many people in the room know about Minecraft, given the demographics, but it looks like a Minecraft piece that's been digitally put together. I just want to get it into a solid form. I'm going to get it clean, and then I'm going to start shaping it. I do a lot of shear cuts, a lot of pull cuts, especially on the bottom side. I do love my scrapers, so you can judge me after it. I like my scrapers too after I've used my gouge. And then if we don't get to it, I want to talk about it real quick. This is my top, this is my bottom. That felt like I'm a little teapot for a second, didn't it? On the top side, I'm going to, when it's reversed and it's on the headstock, I'm going to use, and maybe we'll get to that, I don't know, a Jacob's chuck. I know what I'm going to use for my forstner bit, what I want the opening to be, and I'm going to drill that opening that's going to become the vessel top from the inside out is what I'm going to do. And then we probably won't have time, but then what I'll do after that is I'll part it at the top of that opening on the top side, the top half. And then when I mate them together, I'll use the cone center on that and where that Jacob's chuck over that Forstner bit, drill the hole. That's what I'm going to use for my pressure when I glue the 2 halves together on the lathe. Make sense? Any questions on any of that? Okay. All right. This is the first time I've turned in front of anybody besides my family. And it's also the first time I've turned on a Powermatic. So if I use the wrong side of the gouge, somebody point it out and tell me I'm using the dull end. Okay. I like to turn fast. So we're probably going to get up to about 2K. All right. So what I'm going to do, if you guys can still hear me, is I'm trying to trim off all those edges. And I want to get down to where those glue joints are between my rings. Is really my main purpose right now is to do nothing but that. So I'm not really getting too much into shape. I'm more getting into getting off that excess, getting off those angles. So I got a smooth surface and then getting down into where those rings glue together. So on this one, that bottom ring, if you remember, if I separated these two, you'd see that bottom ring is almost a solid disc all the way through. So I know that I have to make that really steep curve to get around to that bottom because I want a small foot on the bottom. So that one is super thick. I got a lot of room to play with. And because of the steepness of that angle, I may not use the full thickness of that bottom ring. It may end up being half of that ring or something proportionate to get that foot down instead of it coming down and then popping out. I want it to be a smooth all the way around. The other part I didn't talk about, but I will when I take this back off again. When you're gluing those segments together, those pies, or those, you know, the triangles, they're never going to perfectly mate at the very tip. So if you didn't do something on the inside of that, or where they all come together at the final point, and you held up to the light, you'd be able to see, if you held the vessel up and you look through the opening, you'd be able to see pinpoints of light coming through where that bottom segmented piece joins together. So what I usually do is I'll drill a hole through it. I'll take some dowel that's already either pre-turned or I bought it, it's maple dowel, and I'll drill the exact same size as that dowel and the bottom. And I did that before I came here today. I'll drill that in the bottom piece of the base, and then I'll put some glue in there and run that dowel through there. And that way I've got a solid base to the bottom. Make sense? All right. Yeah, I probably am. On that bottom piece. I also need to do some, what do you call it? I'm going to trim off some of the thickness here to give me a little bit more room. So I think it's close to where I want to be. I think I'm going to take a little bit more off the diameter on that. All right, it's gonna give me a general shape, at least to the bottom. I'm probably gonna refine that, cut off half of that bottom, because I don't want the foot to be that narrow. But that's all just design preference, I think. And see how I'm not quite far down enough yet, so you can still see those glue lines? I don't know if you guys can see them or not. Yeah. Okay. So I know I gotta go a little bit further, but over here I've got plenty of, I'm clean. I've got some real clean, tight joint lines, so I'm good there. Making sense so far? Not a whole lot to say. Thanks.
Hey, Steve, just a comment, I guess
I'm kind of
for
liking this.
Michael.
This is what you use,
maybe-
Preston? I've had a Nova forever. It was in my,
Go ahead, Ted. What's your question?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, Steve. I can't hear
I
you
can't
very
hear.
well. But it's just a comment that Michael was cutting from the outside to the inside with his tools on both of those, but because he's cutting side grain, it doesn't really matter, I guess, whether he's going essentially uphill or downhill on it, correct?
So Ted's comment was,
oh,
does it matter whether you're cutting, you appear to be cutting uphill versus downhill? Does it matter because you're cutting side grain?
correct, because I don't have to worry about those fibers.
We'll repeat that.
Okay. So up grain versus down, or uphill versus downhill, side grain versus end grain. I don't have to worry about any of that because those fibers aren't being supported. There is no end grain as far as I'm concerned. Is it intelligent to cut uphill? No. Do I do it sometimes? Yes. I try to cut downhill most of the time. If this was a burl vessel or if it was just some ambrosia maple and I was making a hull form, yeah, I'd be much more cognizant of that. But because this is all side grain, I'm not going to get tear out. I'm not going to get anything like that. There's no worry about the fibers supporting each other on the backside cut. None of that kind of stuff.
So Michael, so because you use the design software,
Mhm.
the low points at the intersection, does that essentially define the shape? I mean, if you've cut everything accurately to the design,
Yeah.
are they they essentially become the valleys of your contours in as you're turning? Is that
Yeah.
is that a fair
So if I've
statement?
got two. I don't even know where my stuff is now. What happened to the rings? Do we know? Doesn't matter. Anyways. Oh. All right, yeah. And for my next act, no. So if I've got two, where's my camera? There it is. So if I've got two of these, and what's the best way to show it? Like that. And that's the way they're laid out. That distance between these two. That's really what I'm worried about. I'm cutting from the top of this ring through most of it to get to the first part of the second ring. That's going to define my shape, my outer shape. Is that what the question was?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that actually is, it helps define your shape
It
as
does.
your, so I guess that would be an advantage of the accuracy of following the design program.
Yeah,
Because that in fact is giving you the outline of your shape.
you could take and just cut the same, like make a bunch of rings that are almost discs, glue them together and call it segmented. Wouldn't be a problem with that, but you're wasting a ton of wood, A. B, you might as well start off with a log at that point. But yes, then you wouldn't really, it would be free form. You could do whatever you want to do, but it wouldn't define that shape based on the way you've designed it. Fair enough?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of room on this waist block because I know I want to start going in at the top of the vessel. And I'm not going to go too far in because I still need this to support itself so that when I flip it around and I hollow out the other side, but at least want to start setting what that's going to look like, my angle of approach is going to look like when I'm done. Okay. I don't feel that shake that we heard before with Alan. Is that because we leveled everything out? Yeah, I don't, if anything, it's just my turn, that vibration is probably me. It's not, yeah. What's that? No. Try not to block the camera. All right. And you guys got to remember that for me, I don't care about a perfect finish. I don't care about any of that because this is all going to be beaded and indexed and all those things. So I just care about shape is mostly what I care about. I just want to get rid of my glue lines. I don't care about the perfect cut. I don't care about any of that. One thing I didn't mention, and I should have, I apologize. Before I came here, these two pieces I have them mounted. Obviously, I glued up 5 layers. I did the same thing on the other side. The way those layers stack, any kind of variation to get these two to mate together cleanly, I actually took them and turned and just cleaned up the top surface on each top of the vessel with a scraper before I came here to make sure that and I took a straight edge to it to make sure that it wasn't concave or convex. So I didn't mention that either. I apologize. Blue lines? Oh, right here? That's glue. I haven't gone down far enough. So I'm just going to take a scraper and I just want to get basically a flat surface, not a flat, but I want to just level it out a little bit, get rid of those glue lines. Like I said, I don't like how thin that is at the very bottom, so I'll probably go halfway when I part this off, and I'll take that in consideration when I'm hollowing out the inside of the next one. Any questions?
Before you separate those two, will you put a pencil mark so that the them out? I know it's not supposed to matter, but it being what.
Yeah, well, it will. When I go and I glue them back together, one side's going to be slightly off a little bit, but I try to leave enough thickness on the inside to wet. I do a final turn, and it's literally with just a scraper, just to get it all level. And like I said, at the end of the day, I'm going to come back with a beading tool anyways. I'm going to bead the whole thing. So whatever surface I put on this, if I took the time to sand it, it would be pointless. But for you guys, you know, if you were going to do not something beaded, you could really get into getting a perfect surface, sanding it. I tend to use a bowl sander for everything when I sand, and get it all nice and clean. I didn't put it in our examples, but I did do that piece I talked about with the different veneers between it. And that piece was intended, I was never going to beat it. I was never going to do anything with it other than make a vessel from it. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So if you use like some figured wood, some bird's eye maple, that kind of thing, and that's like that sapelli or am I saying, I don't know, sapele. That stuff, the points on that is incredible. So I'm just going to focus on getting rid of those glue lines a little bit. And I'm just refining my shape just a little bit. So I got a little hump right here. I've got some more glue up here. Okay. At that point, I would call that part done for me in terms of stage one, because I still got to glue it together and then do a final pass on it. You can do it with a gouge and do a shear cut. You know, if you're really good and doing your shapes on a push cut, God bless you. That's not me. A little ridge there. Okay. If I was at home, I'd probably futz with this a lot longer and nitpick it and all that kind of stuff and try to refine a little bit more, but I think everybody gets the point. Thanks. And I still got a little bit of glue line here, you can see. Like I said, I know I'm still gonna do a final pass on this. So I'm gonna call it okay for now for demo purposes. So I get rid of that. I open it up. And then like you can see that peg, that dowel that I put in there to close up that bottom and make it perfectly clean. And the cool part is look at all the cool shavings. It looks like you really know what the hell you're doing. I have gotten piles and piles. I mean, two and three vessels at a time. It'll be to the bottom of the lathe, to the bottom of the bed, and just shavings. And you think I turned a whole tree, and it's just because it's all end grain or side grain type shavings. I'm probably not going to do the full shebang on this. I'm going to do part, and then I'll do the other part because I want you guys to see how I drill the top through. How are we doing on time, by the way? 25 of 9. Okay. I wish that got out of the way.
Take it out.
Yeah, I wish it swung away though. I don't know. Preston. Well, you know what? Let's just take the. There we go. Okay. Thank you, sir. So this is the fun part because the inside's got all those different angles too. So it can make you skip around a little bit. I just keep taking little bits away at a time. And I'm cutting downwards into those angles. So it's not like, I'm gonna make a weird noise. So it's not like that and all kind of sketchy. No, I'm trying to hit the camera. I think it'd be cool if I could do that. I can't. All right. A little bit, huh? Probably need to sharpen, but. All right, so I'm getting pretty decent my wall thickness here. I will leave. I want to get rid of all my glue lines because it's going to be a closed vessel. I do, because I'm kind of anal retentive like that. I do like to have a real nice clean surface. Even on my hollow forms, I use a scraper on the inside just to get them all clean. Because first thing people do when they pick up one of your pieces is they stick their finger inside the hole. And I want mine to be really smooth and clean. What I do sometimes though, for fun, is I paint the insides. So I'll paint them crazy colors, or if I know my pattern on the basket illusion is going to be blue and pink, or I'm making stuff up right now, then I'll do something like that in the inside too, just so if somebody picks it up and they look at it, the first thing they do is they stick their finger in there, then they look inside. So I'll do that a lot of the time. Or sometimes I'll just take black India ink and I'll just cover the inside, make it black, so they don't see anything inside. Yeah. I haven't noticed that they do. I think, I'm sorry, Preston asked if the glue dulls the tools faster than, I don't think they do. It is kiln dried wood. I don't think the glue makes a difference, to be honest with you. And I use a really sharp angle on my gouge. I use the real swept back wings. I'm sure that if I got a bottom feeder type gouge, I'd be a lot happier, but I'm a simple guy. You know what I mean? The other part that I like about, I don't have to worry about a depth gauge. I don't have to worry about any of that. I know when I'm gonna hit that next level. And I know the next level is gonna be 1 inch thick. And I know I want to go ½ inch down. So I know it's gonna be about that much. So with these kind of things, I think you don't have to necessarily worry so much about wall thickness, because once you start seeing those glue lines go away, you know you're there. And then with the actual depth, I can see the different layers, so I know where I'm at in that vessel. I don't have to worry about, oh crap, I just made a funnel. So I kind of like that about it. I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to get, normally I'd sit there and start refining this and clean it up. You get the gist, we're fine. I want to move to the other side so you can see what I do with that. So on the initial, I would say, meaning right now, I would say I'm pretty close. So I would say, depending on the size of the vessel, if I do a real small one, I probably want 3/8, because when I beat it, I'm going to lose the depth of that bead on top of that. So this is probably thicker than some people would want it to be artistically. If I'm doing a burl or a natural wood hollow form, I'm trying to go as thin as possible. I've got my hollowing set up out with the laser, and I'm trying to get it to be paper thin. With these, I'm giving myself some thickness, because when I mate those two sides together, the top and the bottom, there's going to be a variance. So I'm going to have to take off another 1/16 or, you know, something, couple 1/16 of it. And then the other part is I'm going to go ahead and beat it too. So I'm going to lose either an 1/8 or on the exterior too. Does that help? Okay. Preston, how do you lock it? That simple? Hey, good thing you're here. Thank you, sir. You okay? I'll give you a piece of what they're paying me tonight. Oh, wait. It pays in shavings. Okay. And ironically, we need the tailstock again. How many wood turns does it take to put the tailstock on? This needs some oil. Okay, good enough. These self-eject, I'm sure. Okay. Sweet. All right, so like we talked about, I'm just gonna go ahead and drill that
3,000.
at 4,000 RPMs. You guys like to see Forstner bits catch on fire? This is pretty cool. I usually do all my drilling at around 500, give or take. Well, 325, depending on what it says. There we go. That's good enough. 600, whatever. So I'm going to drill until I start seeing that cherry shavings come through, like there. And that's all. And that's the only purpose of that is now I've defined where that's going to be, and I'll start hollowing out that way to meet the diameter. So I know my exterior diameter, except for obviously I want some heft on here. So it still has something to hold on to. In this case, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Before I turned the outside, so I knew what I wanted the inside to be. In this case, I'm going to mimic that like I did before, but when I get to here, this is not my final diameter. So I'm actually going to turn the inside what I think it should be. And then when I flip it around and I glue it together, I'll shave off that outside to be an even thickness. Does that make any sense at all? Made perfect sense in my mind. And then I'm just going to do this one part here, and then we'll call it good for the night. We can answer questions. That way we're not running up against too much time. I think that should be good. Yeah, I'm good. Same thing, about 2,000 RPM. And that's pretty much the way I do those inside. Might take a little bit off the edge here, and so we're not. Now, what I normally would do here is if I've already established my wall thickness on the bottom piece, I get my calipers. I'd know what that wall thickness is. I'd come over here, I'd put a pencil line on it, I'd scribe it around, and then I'd turn towards that pencil line is what I would do. Starting from that corner, little by little, shaving it off, just to get rid of those angles. I'm going to say that's pretty close to what the other one is. And then I'm just going to work down towards those glue lines. Kind of hit me. Am I even getting close? What's that? Trying to hit the camera. Am I even getting close? All right. Yeah. So that's gonna be, that would not be done. That would be 70% done. And then I would go through and clean it up. And I would probably put a scraper on the inside, get a clean surface. I'm not gonna sand it. Because I'm not done with this, I'm not gonna part it. Because I want to take it home and actually finish it. Because after putting all this work into the segments, I'm not gonna throw this shit in the fireplace, you know what I'm saying? So what I would do after this point is I would take my thin parting tool, I would part it off here. I would get, it would be clean where that opening is right there. Because I'd try to do a little bit on the concave or on the inside there when I parted it. And then I would reverse it, put that back on the lathe. I'd put my cone center in here. I'd match them up, make sure that my glue lines are staggered. And then I would use that tail, I'd put a little glue on here. I'd use that tail stock and I'd clamp it together. I'd let it sit overnight, come back the next day, hit it with a scraper just to level it all out. And then I'd start my beating process and my indexing, and then we're looking at 60 more hours from now before we're done. But that's it. That's all I got. Thank you, thank you. Good, good. Any questions? Anybody want to tell me I'm crazy?
Oh.
Yes. Norm, would you like to tell me I'm crazy?
No, I have a question. So, beating aside, start to finish, give us a ballpark of percent of time spent planning, percent of time spent cutting, gluing.
Yeah. Okay. So Norm asked what kind of time frame it takes from start to finish.
Could you guys just hold down the audience chatter, please? Tom? It just comes up.
Norm asked what, he's basically asking how stupid am I? How long does it take from start to finish if I was not doing beading or anything like that? I was just doing a decorative piece. I would say the project plans I already designed. I've already figured those out and I have them saved in a folder and I just print them off, or I have a stack in my workshop. If I included that, it might take me 15, 20 minutes to refine my shape in the computer and then tell it to print for me. Let's assume that I've already got that done. So it's just grabbing the lumber, cutting it into strips, and then making segments. I would say I probably have 3 hours into that. And that's because cutting all the strips, doing the segmented pieces, and then for me, the longest part is standing there at the sander and getting the fuzzies off it over and over again. So maybe not 3 hours, maybe a couple hours into just the cutting part. The gluing part's pretty fast. Like I said, I just sit in my recliner, I got the TV going, and I lay them out. I glue them like you saw in the video. I put the clamp on it, move on to the next, move on to the next. So maybe I got an hour into that. And then the running them through the drum sander, maybe 30 minutes. But the drum sander is doing all the work. And then the stacking, 10 layers. If I did a layer, waited 15 minutes, do another layer, so 4 an hour, couple hours, but that's not hands-on time. That's, I go inside and do something else and wait. The downside is doing it that way is I can't use my lathe at all while I'm waiting to the point where I'm like, damn, I want another lathe.
Second lathe.
Yeah, there are jigs that I've made that will help you stack them and get them centered, but they're just not as good, in my opinion, as using cold jaws. And so that's the downside for me, is my production stops. I can't go turn anything else while I'm waiting for the next ring to dry. That would be a negative, in my opinion. But so let's call it an hour of hands-on time gluing, because the rest of the time you're just waiting for glue to dry. And then turning, I mean, I'm almost done with this. I would probably spend another 30 minutes on this, just refining it and cleaning it up, because I wouldn't be nervous in front of a crowd turning on a lathe I never turned on. So maybe 4 or 5 hours, max, all in. But it's not always hand-on time. It's a lot of it's gluing and yeah. And honestly, the material costs are cheap when you think about it. Maple's not super cheap. It's not expensive. The waste is pretty minimal. I mean, it's not like I'm wasting a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of shavings on the ground, but I really didn't turn away a lot of material. So I'm getting good yield out of my material. If you paid yourself, you know, $20 an hour and you got 5 hours into it, you could sell it for that. I've sold some pieces that were segmented, and people appreciate the hours you have into it and the time. So they'll happily give you some money in the right venue, I think. Or your wife thinks, that's beautiful, it's mine, and you get kudos. That kind of thing. That answer that question?
Yes.
Are you contemplating doing it? I know you weren't.
No, I'll play the video back. I want to see the percentage that goes after.
Oh, yeah. He's looking, Norm's looking to trip me up.
No, I'm guessing it's scale.
Oh, yeah.
That's 5, 6 hours for you, when you've got 100 of it.
I don't think it'd be 100 hours for the first one. I think if you've never done it before, you're gonna have to build the jig, you have to do that, but that's, to me, that's fun. You know, that's like a good Saturday. Yes, yes,
Pie chart.
a pie chart. I don't think it would take you that long, Preston. I really don't. I think that once you messed up a couple, meaning you cut a couple of the segments, you're like, oh, I didn't do that. I gotta, I nicked the blade and it messed the segment up. I don't think it'd take you that long.
That's right. Your time estimate don't include mistake time.
No, yeah, and I don't, it's not that I don't make mistakes now. I still make mistakes. I think anybody that tells you they don't make mistakes is full of it. And mistakes are the way you learn not to make another mistake. I don't think it would be that big of a deal, to be honest. And honestly, when I first started turning, that was one of the first things I did was do a segmented piece because I just thought it was cool and I liked the challenge. And if I could do it, not knowing what the hell I was doing with the lathe, any of that kind of stuff, I'm sure you could do it.
You actually, the only cut 16 or anything, like I thought probably I always cut a couple extras.
Yeah,
Hardly ever need.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you wanted to do that to give yourself a little bit of lead room, absolutely. I have cut one less than I should have before, and that's how I learned to always double count after you've cut them. So I count before I put them in the bucket, and then after I sand them, I count them as I put them in the Ziploc bag, just because I don't want to go to glue and then I go, oh, I got to go reset all the tools, and I know that my jig's not going to be set up perfectly the same way again. My stop block's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to match. So I always make sure that I've cut at least 16. Jeff?
You cut that first piece, so when you measure to make sure you were set up right, or just gonna be close enough.
Yep. Now, so Jeff asked, I don't know if anybody heard, if I cut a piece, do I measure it after I cut it to make sure that and I don't, because it's going to be repeated anyways. As long as I'm pretty close, if I need 27, 30 seconds, and it's not quite that, I don't even know what the next number is to 27, 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay. Not according to my caliper.
How about 14, 16?
I don't care, as long as it's close enough. You know what I mean? If that diameter is off by 1/8 of an inch, it's not really gonna matter to me. Anyway.
So with that said,
Yeah, the wedgie sled or for the segment, yeah.
can you actually get grain match?
Yes. So
Okay.
in the application, the software I have, you indicate if you want grain match. If you want grain match, it gets really specific about what to do and how to do it. Yep. So, and you don't have to, like I said, I put a witness on the top so that I can flip over every other one just to compensate. If you really want to get into it, you could make sure that your blade was dead center at 90. You don't have to worry about flipping them to compensate for any variance. And you could get perfect grain match all the way around, especially with a really cool,
That's pretty cool.
yeah. You can make some nice pieces.
Pretty cool.
Folks on Zoom, do you have any questions or comments?
No,
Prepare
I
for
don't
us.
see any further, there's a few comments in here
Yeah,
about using a tail stock,
it is.
threaded piece, right, to hold the chuck so you're not just using pressure. Someone made a comment about that earlier.
Okay, but no questions?
I'm looking, but I don't
Any
see any.
criticism?
Yeah,
Yeah, There's a lot of criticism.
So there was a comment in the in the chat about using the threaded adapter on the tailstock instead of the cone, but
Yeah,
uh,
it'd probably be smarter. I just haven't done it.
Yeah,
And,
and then Ray Schwartz had a question about the purpose of the dowel, and I know that Michael
That's
talked
true.
about that, but can
Yeah,
you talk
I'll ask
about the
him, yeah.
dowel?
maybe I should
and-
invest in one of those.
could you explain why I put the dowel in again?
So yeah, this is the bottom. Even though I've cut those wedgies and they're as close as they can possibly be, when you glue them together, you're still gonna have a slight variance in the center where they all meet together. If you think about pieces of a pie coming together in the pie, the center of the pie, you're gonna have a slight pinhole, or you're gonna have something that's 1/8 of an inch or something like that. It's not gonna be perfection. Yeah. So that if I were to make this, not do something about the center there, and then I were to sell it, and a customer were to pick up that piece, they look inside the vessel and they see light coming through the other side, in my opinion, that's not so cool. So what I do is I drill, before I turn all this, I drill a hole through the bottom, and then I put a dowel through it. So it just makes it so a perfectly clean surface and there's no light escaping or coming through or any of that. That help? Yep. Thank you.
All right, we're at our time limit here. So I'd like to thank Michael for
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate it.
Yep, thanks.
And I hope you guys appreciate the fact that this was supposed to be a two-man show tonight, and just about 4 or 5 days ago that Bob got sick. So Michael really danced well, adapted very well.
You never know, he used to say.